What's happening, YouTube community? Welcome to the Mr. Winslow channel. I am Mr. Winslow, your host, and today we're going to be talking about racism within the black community. Now, racism is broken into two branches. We have interracial racism and we have intra-racial racism. Interracial racism is probably the most recognizable because it deals primarily between the races. We have seen interracial racism with every ethnic group that has set foot on American soil. We have seen it between the white, the black, the brown, the yellow, the red, the tan, and so on. We have seen interracial racism on an international scale with Africa and its dealings with apartheid. We've seen it with the UK and its dealings with India. We have even seen it in Australia in its dealings with the Aborigines. These are just examples of interracial racism, racism that exists primarily between the races, one race to the other. Now, when we look at intra-racial racism, we see a far more diabolical and insidious plan of action at work. Intra-racial racism occurs within one's own race. We see this in the forms of our rap videos. We have even seen it on the streets. We've even seen it in the media. Now, how has this taken form, Mr. Winslow? I'll tell you how. When you see a black person referring to himself or herself as a nigger, then that is a form of not only great self-hate, but it is also a form of intra-racial racism. Remember, this is the racism that occurs within one's race. We see that this is the truest form of self-hate. We see that it justifies bad words, and we see that it gives license to other races in order to degrade us. Now, I'm not going to sit up here and bullshit you and say that I know all of the answers to solving the problem of racism. It is a situation that has been around long before I was born, and hopefully we can get rid of it. But being realistic, there will be forms of racism as long as there are people with differences that live on the planet. How can we rid ourselves, or at least put ourselves on a course of limiting racism in the interracial form and the intra-racial form? We must first know our history. We must second think before we speak, and last but not least, we must respect each other, because respect is a two-way street. Number one, when it comes to knowing our history, it's not enough to say, well, I know about Harriet Tubman and the Underground Railroad. No. Knowing your history is a lot deeper than that. Knowing your history is saying, I know about Harriet Tubman and I also know about Nat Turner. Knowing your history says, I not only know about Malcolm X, but I know about Martin Luther King Jr. Knowing your history also means that I not only know where I came from, but I have a very good idea of knowing where I'm going, because I have a positive mindset and peace of mind. Secondly, we must think before we speak. We must take a very sober mindset and a very peaceful mindset when it comes in our dealings with ourselves and with other people. If we do not have peace of mind, and if we do not think before we speak, we are a ship without a sail. We are disaster just waiting to happen. We need to say, you know what, before I utter these words, before I call this person a nigger or a spick or a kike or a chink, I'm going to say, you know what, I want someone to speak to me that way. I'm going to say that this person is far more than just a nigger. He's far more, or she's far more than just a red bone or a yellow bone. I'm going to say, excuse me, sir, or excuse me, miss, what is your name? Tell me about yourself. I'm interested in you. No, you don't go up to someone and say, well, hey, nigga, what's happening? You know what? I really want to know about that. That's a badass yellow bone right there. I got to get some of that. No, that's a form of self-hate. As endearing as it may sound, it is still self-hate. It is still intra-racial racism. Finally, we must realize that respect is a two-way street. Respect is a situation of reciprocity. It's a situation of give and take, give and take. We must take that to mind when we deal with a solution that is going to put us on the course to peace and ridding ourselves of racism. Interracial racism is horrible. Intra-racial racism is horrible. The only reason why, in my opinion, I say that intra-racial racism is the worst is because it teaches self-hate. We need to rid ourselves of self-hate in the black community, and furthermore, this is going to teach us to rid ourselves of the interracial racism that exists from one race to the other. We must demonstrate a knowledge of history. We must demonstrate a think before you speak mindset, and we must realize that respect is a two-way street. In closing, it would be very, very messed up of me, well, I'll just go ahead and say it, fucked up of me to refer to Martin Luther King as my nigger. If Martin Luther King Jr. were alive to this day and I referred to him as my nigger, or if I referred to Malcolm X as my nigger, there would be a problem. If Rosa Parks were still alive today and I were to say to her, you know what, you a badass yellowbone. No. This is something that is totally inappropriate. This is something that shows intra-racial racism, and we need to rid that from our memory banks. We need to rid our minds of that thing because intra-racial racism focuses on the destruction of ourselves. And we are not suicidal people. We are people of life. We are people of promise. We are positive people. So, remember, know your history, think before you speak, and realize that respect is a two-way street. Until next time, YouTube community, God bless.